All right. So I think we can probably make a start in a couple of minutes. So for the tutorials this week, we've generally allowed a couple of minutes after the hour to start, just as participants join. I think it's the usual thing of calendars do the reminder on the hour, and then people go, "Ooh, I need to join." So I'll just do introduction for Barry right now, and then I'll depart because I'm doing a tutorial at the same time as this, which is a shame because I really wanted to sit in and listen to Barry's content. But anyway, I'd like to introduce you all to Barry Green. Known Barry since, I don't know, 1998. We're both working at Cisco, doing a lot of this kind of stuff. He's been a great friend, great support of Apricot. Well, from before then, probably I would say one of the founding members of Apricot back in 1996 when arm twisting Singapore Telecom as it was in the day into being able to support the actual event. So it's great to have you with us, Barry. We're looking forward to the next 3 hours that you have to share with us. And I will leave it to you, up to you when you want to work out when to start. And it's 3 minutes past the hour now, so probably a minute or two while you work out slides and then and screen sharing, and then we can get going.
Thank you. Nice seeing you again, Phil. So, okay, excellent, good. John's on there too. John, are you going to be able to cut in with voice later on during our Q&A section?
Yes, I can help you with that, Barry. No problems at all.
Oh, excellent. So while we're waiting for people, I think I'm going to put in.
I mean, Barry, if you want to be interrupted for questions as well, then John could do that too. So it's
that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to put in there into the chat for everybody here. Just put some little quick instructions while we're waiting.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy.
Excellent. Thank you. So here is the version of the slides. So let's make sure everybody's got the, as I am a prolific share of materials. Okay. So that way everybody has the slides, and then if you have questions, please ask. Whoa. There we go. So there we go. I can see lots of different animal figures join in with Google stuff. And let's go ahead and share the screen. There we go. Excellent. There. So we have about 23 people here, and we are recording this session. So why don't we go ahead and just start getting started? We can start giving introductions to everyone here with this. So welcome everyone. Today, in this particular section, we're going to be talking about DDoS a little bit differently than people usually hear about it. This session would give you guys some background. My first DDoS attack was in 1991. If you makes me an old fogey if you date back by then. This was an attack in the middle of Desert Shield, if you remember, in the first Gulf War there, or second Gulf War, depending on how you're counting. And it was a UDP flood attack, hitting on a military network. Come yesterday, You know, I'm watching the Slack channel with Akamai's SOC, our Security Operations Center, and what are we seeing? The same type of UDP flood attack. All right, so you can see how things, you know, have changed in the intensity, because that attack I was handling was saturating a 128 kilobit per second link, and the attacks coming in yesterday was in the hundreds of gigabytes, right? But it's the same sort of thing that's been happening out there. So when I teach DDoS, as we'll go through see today, I teach it from a little bit different angle of it, because of how this works with it. As you can see in there, Senki.org, that's the website I share a lot of the materials. If you looked at a lot of materials, as Philip mentioned in the introduction, he and I are of the same mindset, that we love to help other engineers and encourage that whole sense of collaboration in the community that we kind of grew up with on the internet. And it gives us a lot of eking out joy, in the sense of we always enjoy learning new things with each other. And this is part of presented in this sort of mode. So so let's go ahead and continue with this. So what we're going to learn today is we're going to kind of go through and understand a bit about today's threat vectors of DDoS, because how you build a resilient architecture to withstand a DOS attack, because it's not if you're going to get a DOS attack, it's when you get a DOS attack, and how you build the resiliency architectures as engineers, because we're assuming this is an engineering environment. We're all being engineers, and how do you engineer for resiliency? You got to understand the threat vectors. And it's one of those things I run into day in, day out. This morning, I had 2 customer calls, and both of the organizations, you know, I'll be walking them through, okay, what is your DNS resiliency architecture you're trying to design? And, you know, crickets on the other side. So this is why one of these core principles of understanding, here are the factors that go into, and the engineering part of it. From a DDoS perspective, this is what we're going to go through today. Then we're going to touch a bit about the DDoS extortion waves and explain what DDoS extortion waves are. And we are in the long tail of a DDoS extortion wave that started in August, and we're starting at the beginning of a new surge that we'll see with around ransomware usage, right? And so we'll see these, and then I'll explain some of the other stuff with it. And then lots of questions and exchange. Since this is Zoom, please use the Q&A section or the chat. You know, both of those kind of work with it. The use of the slides, as you browse around senki.org, you're going to find a lot of materials. That's intentional. I'm somebody over the years who have been very, you know, fortunate in the sense I was trained how to do slides, and was early part of, you know, when the first version of PowerPoint came out, I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. So over the years, I've come pretty good at it. So I'm pretty good at listening to different people talk about different concepts and put them in slides. Hence, I'd like to publish them as much as possible. So like those of you who are trying to explain something to your boss, and you're trying to get the point across because you're trying to get justification to get something done inside your network. And if you see something that I have done in a slide or in a PDF or something, if you can't find the PowerPoint, if you can't find a Google slide, ping me, I will send it to you, right? I'd rather have you spend your time convincing your boss or the management to get something done that you feel important in your network than trying to build a slide on it. Cut and paste, use it, you know, Creative Commons, whatever you will call with it. So that's kind of like the attitude with the slides out there. This particular deck has 2 extras. One of them we're actually going to be talking about. It's the kind of like the next section on the DNS resiliency part. This has got a smaller subset in this particular slide deck. And then next week, Pietro, who's a colleague of mine, because I wear a couple of hats. There's my Senki hat, there's my Akamai hat, and there's I work with the Shadow Server crew. Pietro from the Shadow Server crew is going to be doing about the network, the daily network report. So watch that, but you can get a preview on these slides here that you pull down with it. Basic theme of Apricot, you know, this is actually a theme of a lot of these operations meetings. A lot of people don't realize how important these operational gatherings of all us as colleagues coming together, talking to each other are really, really important. So, take advantage of some of the apricot tools to kind of like talk to each other, get to know each other, in these COVID days, use tools to, get online with each other. It's really important for our mental health. It's also really, really important as professionals, because the sex is not really, it's not the loud stuff that you see out there. It's all this behind the scenes work that we do all the time. So let's talk about the miscreant threat. Premise about the miscreant threat is one core thing, and I'll be talking about this in the third session today about, how do you have meaningful conversations with different vendors who are coming into your network. The reality is that we live in a world where we cannot stop the threat vector, and I'll kind of talk through it. So the first aspect of it is that the tools for like doing security is just not there. As like for instance, we're in the middle in the United States of slowly unraveling a major state actor who got, inside government networks and commercial networks all over the place, right? As it started popping out, right in the beginning, I was saying, oh, this is serious, because when I saw the phrases Kevin Mandiant was using and working on some of these state actor penetrations in the past, I said, this is serious. If bad guys want to get into a network, they will get into it. All right, so that's the reality. You have to assume that bad guys are in your network, right? And that's kind of like the mode I advocate day in, day out inside a big, inside the network, is just assume that bad guys are going to get in, and then you have to do things to actually mitigate the risk if knowing that they're going to be inside your network, right? And there's different ways of doing about that. But what's the reason why that's out there? I mean, why are we living in a world that's the way right now? And the key thing is people don't realize, there's an old adage where they say, you think of the end in mind, what you're trying to do, because you can actually be putting a ladder on the wrong wall. Our ladder is on the wrong wall. We think we have a cybersecurity problem. We think we have a DDoS problem. We don't. What we have, because the world is all jumbled together in this internet/telecom world, because internet and telecom are all together now. It's this, same infrastructure all intertwined together. And this is kind of like the world we live in. There are no borders. You can have somebody in another country go out there, do things, and how do you put checks and balance against it? So here in Asia Pacific, how do you actually, if somebody, not pointing fingers, but if somebody from India hacked into somebody in Japan, do you have extradition where you can actually put evidence from Japan into somebody in India and extradite the person across? That is not really established. We don't have international, justice systems put in place, right? So that is a factor, right? We have an international justice problem in the world. We also have a problem within the security community itself. The security community itself, it just goes like, oh, did you see this blog? I said, okay. This is an analogy that we have when you read about security activities in blogs and news and things like that. It's that you get a lot of companies who, send somebody to Black Hat or DEF CON or, RSA, and they get up on stage and they start talking about the AK-47. It's like I was the chief of police of a city, and the bank got robbed, and I get up there and I start in the press conference about what happened at the bank robbery, and I start saying, okay, the bank robbers used this AK-47 and they painted a stock special, so it was purple instead of the brown color, and then it had this special bayonet, and they used this type of ammunition, and they fired this many shots, right? The reporters and the citizens for the chief of police are like, what are you talking about? Who robbed the bank? When did they rob the bank? How are you going to capture them, right? It's the target, right? DOS attacks don't just happen. People start DOS attacks. Malware just don't happen. People write the malware and distribute the malware. Botnets don't happen. Somebody's building those botnets. There's always people behind it, right? And so we're working on the wrong security problem. We're working on, oh, this is a cool geeky thing about, what they use to actually do it, but we're not focusing on like, okay, what are the reasons and motivations around it? You run into a problem with that as you go out there and start looking at the different threat vectors. A lot of people think about the cybersecurity threats, but as we just found out, with the SolarWinds, investigations, nation states do stuff. And to think that nation states aren't doing things in Asia Pacific is beware, because it's happening a lot. Before I was at Akamai, I was over in Indonesia doing a gig at a cell phone and a fixed line company, and the nation state stuff going on there, it was, it's all there. Whether you see it or not is different. The other thing you have is you have the political protesters out there, right? It's like people say, oh, like I always get these questions about people saying like, oh, are you worried about the threat from China? So it's like, well, you have state actors in China. Those aren't the ones I worry about. The ones I worry about are the, 300,000 patriotic geeks who get mad and lost a massive DOS attack at somebody, or a massive break-in campaign or something like that. Political protest, you see that you're seeing that. I mean, you're seeing that with the different conflicts that go on inside the region. Asia, you have this other factor going on. And I don't know how many people of here on this list have run into it, but you have the corporate security threats. Oh, I got this company in this country run by this family. I got this other company in the same country run by this other family. Okay, we got to find, how to compete against each other. Okay, how do we find out stuff to compete? They hire these consultants. And what do? They do things to, get into networks, right? So you have to think of these 4 areas. And the corporate threat is interesting. The corporate threat started to come into North America. A lot of people said that, oh, this is something that doesn't happen in North America. But what we found with the Standing Rock protest a couple of years ago, the Standing Rock protest, you had corporations hire people, to come in and spy on all the people who are protesting, right? And so we're seeing the same things with the Black Lives Matters going on. You're seeing the corporate interests being hired in there. So if all these different factors, right, you think of the factors that we got a international justice problem, and that's not going to go away anytime soon, right? The consequence of that is the cybersecurity risk we have, right? We have software that you can't get, fixed. You got the IoT devices and other devices deployed. You got always patching something that's broken because of some vulnerability out there. You got the different threat actors out there, and they could all collide on your network, especially if you're ISP. So you just have to think of, things like DOS attacks, not as like, the DOS attack, just think of it as a force of nature. If you live in, a cyclone area, be ready. If you live in a typhoon area, be ready. You're going to get hit. It's just force of nature. It's going to hit you. So way I position this inside the organizations I go and work in is I position it as a force of nature. The irony that happened with this is I used the same argument 3 years ago when we were doing infrastructure upgrade inside Akamai, where I actually use this force of nature argument about pandemics and whether everybody had to stay at home. And people thought that you're being a little bit extreme, but the company went ahead and we upgraded all our remote access equipment so that we can have everybody in the company work remote with their families connected. So we did, here's each individual, and then we times 5 because we couldn't assume, how many people are in the household. And then that's how much capacity we built up for remote work. A year and a half later, COVID happens, right? So it's not if, then when. That's part of resiliency engineering, is kind of figure out what are the appropriate ways of actually doing it. And DDoS is no factor with it. Now, what happens within these factors, swap over to the minds of the criminals, because remember, it's people who do these things. It's not the AK-47, it's the people. So couple of, around 1999, I'm doing what is now called breaking into the dark web. We didn't call it dark web there, but a colleague of mine, Rob Thomas, who's a founder of Team Cymru, he and I were 3 o'clock in the morning, checking out these different forums and watching stuff, and we were joking back and forth, chatting back and forth on an IRC channel, talking about what makes how many of these people are good and bad and ugly, right? And we started talking about what are the really good ones, because we were noticing there are good ones out there, right? So the first thing we saw that the good ones do is they don't get caught. If they think they're going to get caught doing something criminally, they don't do it. They just move on to something different because they know there's always something different that's more easier to do. They don't work too hard, right? Then they go off to the third principle is they follow the money. In other words, we'll watch them and we see them do things, and say and leave, and then we'll look at it and say, oh, they haven't figured out how to monetize. They haven't, I remember one time I was doing a briefing for a major ISP in North America, and they were saying like, "Oh, we don't have a problem with people breaking into us." And then my bosses at the time, said, "Show them how what they're missing." And then on the screen, I went in there and says, "Here's how you take down your network." And I walked them through 1, 2, 3, 4, right through the security. And here's how you take down your network, a national telecommunications network. And they'll go like, "Holy crap." It says, now here's the criteria. Why somebody isn't doing this? Because they don't know how to get money out of you. So if I bribed you guys, if I extorted you and says, "Give me $1 million or I take your network down," how can you get $1 million to me? They had no idea how to do it. Now that was in the early 2000s. Today, I'll send you a Bitcoin. Here's a Bitcoin wallet. Send $1 million over to this Bitcoin wallet, right? Now it's easier to do that, right? So it's the money is very much a factor in there. If they can't figure out the money, out there, if they can figure out that they don't get caught, they don't have to work to how to follow the money, but you got a very difficult target, like you've got a lot of, resiliency in the network, then they'll move upstream. Do a trace route. Who's an easier target? Move upstream. And this is what many ISPs don't think about is they look at their customers. They got lots of corporate customers. They got banks and things like that. And they don't realize that as soon as they take on a whole bunch of banks, they're a target too. Because if somebody wanted to go after the bank, they would go after the ISP as part of the target environment. We call that doing a target rotation vertically up, right? Going up and down versus horizontally going across the surface area of all the different ways of attacking the target. They also do things in such a way where it makes it hard for law enforcement because they know law enforcement's out there. And we've gotten better and better and better over the decades where we can actually arrest people. We do arrest people. DD4BC was a DDoS extortion crew that was arrested, right? And they're taken down. So which means also they'll try to look at people who won't prosecute. But what's interesting is the DDoS extortion attacks we were getting starting in August is they don't care about this one, and which is why if you look at the general theme that we had in recommendation, what you'll see with this is talk to your law enforcement, right? Because we know that once law enforcement gets involved, and because we've made arrest of DDoS extortionists, that whole thing of don't get caught, rule number 1, don't get caught, we're trying to activate that. So you notice that isn't like a DDoS defense, that's just like activating the police. And that does make a difference, right? That we've seen over the years with it. The other thing they do is they try to stay below the pain threshold. They won't whack you, with, if you're behind the ISP, they won't whack you with a bandwidth that actually gets the ISP waking up, right? So they'll whack you to say, okay, this person has a 10 gig connection to the internet, so I'll hit them with 20 gigs of attack. And that 20 gigs, I know that the ISP is probably going to have capacity to handle that 20 gigs. So ISP isn't going to wake up and say like, okay, let me go out there and do something about it and get the ISPs mad at you. So they'll stay below that pain threshold as a DOS attack is one of the key factors with it. Now, all this is kind of written up. If you go to my blogs out there, you look for the 7 habits of highly effective cyber criminals. I got this written up in details. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use this from a DDoS defense perspective, right? So when you go out there with it, we're going to do things like a lot of miscreant criminals, these behaviors, these first 3, they don't want to work too hard to achieve their goal, and they'll go out there and find other ways of doing it, right? So defense mechanism number 1, besides knowing this, is not to have the perfect DDoS defense, but have a DDoS defense that's going to make them work too hard to achieve their goal of getting money out of you. And if they don't get money out of you, then they'll move on, right? So we're going to kind of talk through some of this stuff. Now, all this has scary consequences, and I'm not going to talk through this. This has actually come out of another presentation, right? And all this scary consequences is around, the badness that's going on out there. Some people say, oh, if I can clean up all the malware out there, then the DDoS will go away. It's not. The malware is not going to clean up. If I can clean up all the reflectors out there, how many people here have gone through an exercise where you take the shadow server daily report? Because we know all the reflectors. We know all the reflectors out there. We know all the tools, all the different endpoints are being used for DDoS reflection out there, total out there. Why aren't they being cleaned up? Well, get on the phone with a dentist's office and say like, okay, you're being used to do a DDoS reflection. And the dental office is going to go, huh? Okay, we need to get you to patch your software. Dental office is going to go, huh? What? Okay. Go through that, and how much does that cost? Oh, I'll send somebody out. How much does that truck roll cost? It's really, really expensive patching all these things. So this is the scary consequences when you look at this, all these different defensive tools, it's just not working out like we thought, right? You know, even if you get law enforcement, hey, law enforcement, can you go down to the dental office? No, I got too many other important crime things to work on, right? So these are the factors that we run into with it, right? It's a scary sort of thing that isn't going to be solved any sort of problem anytime soon. So what we need to do is we need to rethink what's going on. If DOS attacks is just a force of nature and we can't clean up the tools that are being used for DOS attacks, we got to rethink the problem. And a good movie out there, I mean, Asia Pacific, you know, there's a few places up Japan and in South Korea who does, you know, loves baseball. There's a movie that you may find on Netflix called Moneyball. And it's about, you know, this story about the Oakland A's and, you know, rethinking how they can compete because they didn't have the money to compete with the big leagues. They were in a losing game. The deck was stacked against us, you know. And there's this one scene here. I took a picture out of this where you know the head of the club was basically saying we need to rethink. We can't compete with the miscreants. You know, in our sense, we can't compete with the miscreants of all the different threat actors. The game stacked against us. We have to rethink. And part of the rethinking, this is one of the steps of rethinking, is put yourself in the shoes of understanding what the miscreants are doing, what the miscreants are doing to it. So this goes into what we did with the DOS extortion attack, right? So so we have the DOS extortion wave, and I'll talk a little bit more about these attack waves. But the briefing on this one is we had the early indications in the week of August 3rd, right? So on August 3rd, there are several of us who are part of these different trust groups, these security trust groups out there, and we have different tools and we're looking at different things. And we saw the early indications of what a DOS extortion crew starts testing out to see if it's going to work for them. And we saw that, and then we, you know, inside Akamai and then others in the industry, hey, we think there's an extortion crew getting ready to go. The first of the extortion attacks hit an Akamai customer, so which was really good because we have a lot of telemetry. We started sharing that telemetry with our peers. A lot of our peers are like peers, like other anti-DDoS operators. There's this collaboration that goes on behind the scenes within the community, and we also triggered law enforcement. So there's a group in the United States called the NCTFA, the National Cyber Forensics Task Force. That's FBI and Microsoft are the primary funders. It's at Carnegie Mellon University. And they are kind of like the trust group for law enforcement. Their job is us, as we collaborate in private industry, working with the law enforcement side, and they work on collaborating law enforcement side. A lot of law enforcement professionals in Asia Pacific have spent 6 months or spent a year in Pittsburgh at NCTFA. And then they come back into their country, they become the cybersecurity experts. But what's more important is you have this network, right? And so when we call in a network and say we have a DOS extortion crew, we had agents who were working there, not just FBI, but other countries, and they activated a task force, right? So that was immediate. As soon as the extortion attack started, we shared within the community, and then other people, you know, we had the law enforcement investigation side start kicking off. So these are the sort of things were happening. And they were claiming to be different groups like Fancy Bear and Armada Collective. They weren't. They were just trying to get people's attention, right? And they would hit in, you know, and so we see this pickup of this attack. You know, it picked up really, really quick with it. And they had a certain timing preference around it. They would go out there and send you the extortion letter, and hopefully you saw it. Then they do a wake-up attack. Then they send you another extortion letter to remind you got to pay, and then they send a big attack. And they had a time period because they're trying to really get you and whack you and to get you into that, right? So these extortion attacks, one of the first things that as we're pulling together a team to kind of start doing the investigation and preparation work with it, one of the first things I was surprised about is people saying like, oh, we thought, you know, we were talking to different people in different industries saying we thought DOS was gone. Just like I told you at the beginning of this session, you know, my first DOS attack was 91, right? This has been going on for years, and it goes up to these peaks and valleys, right? So this happens with any sort of criminological behavior. You know, I showed this one time to a bunch of US FBI agents, and they go like, oh, that's like, you know, crime cycles we see, you know, with crime going up and down in the drug industry or robberies or things like that. You get these cycles. These cycles always continue with it. And if you know you have these a criminological cycle, right, then what you can do is you can go through and when it's a down period, prepare yourself, knowing that it will come back, right? And it's just like behavior patterns within society. The problem we have, as I mentioned before, things keep on getting worse and worse. The internet keeps on growing, right? The amount of devices out there that can be used for attacks keep on growing. So, you know, the DOS attack I experienced in 91 on 120 kbs, you know, line, you know, and this week I'm watching, you know, hundreds of gigs hitting customers, right? It's a whole different factor. It keeps on getting, you know, the intensity of these go up and up and up, right? Because remember, we don't have checks and balances to stop it, right? So the key thing, what we want to do is we want to make sure we actually, as it goes into down peak, do something about it. So these are slides, you know, that I've used over and over again with executive management to explain to them, you know, when things calm down after attacks, is this is the time period. We don't want to be in the chasm, because if you're in the chasm, then we're going to be caught with our pants down. Part of the phrase, you're going to go with your pants down in the middle of the next attack, right? When you, especially when you're not ready, and the rhythm to each organization of the cycle, the distance between when the attack, you know, you have a badness versus a lull in a period will vary depending on your business and things like that, right? So that's a key thing. So let's talk through these extortionists, right? So these, going back, knowing that these cycles go through, these extortionists come in waves, and a bunch of them will get together and not look at past history and realize, here's what we can do. So we go through and says, okay, their goal is to make money. That's number one of extortionists. They do their homework, they scout out the targets, they focus on industry verticals. So that's key factors with it. The way to think of these people is, when you look at a typical extortionist, like a gangster, you know, they have their baseball bats that go down a line of a street of stores, right? You know, and they go into the store and says, give me my protection money. And, you know, if they don't get the protection money, it says, I'll be back. You know, I'll break some things, right? And then if they go away and the store owner says, I'm not going to pay, I'm going to put up gates, I'm going to put up protections, I'm going to put up security, things like that, you know, they'll come back around. The gangsters come back around and say like, oh, okay, that's a hard target. Now, what do? They don't leave the person alone. What they do is they continue down all the easy. Don't work too hard. They scout out their targets, they go out there and they move on, right? So in these DDoS extortionists, they follow the same patterns. They send out the extortion letter, they send a sample attack, they find out the sample attack didn't do anything. They find out, they look out there that the organization that they're extorting have done things like they changed their DNS authoritative infrastructure, they went behind a DDoS provider, they worked with the ISP, they go like, okay, fine, and they move on, right? They go down to industry vertical, all right? So what they do is they focus on the industry vertical, like I'm gonna focus on all the oil companies, I'm gonna focus on the banks, I'm gonna focus on ISPs, and they'll stay with them for a while and they'll exhaust that list. Then they'll move over to another vertical. Then they move to another vertical. Then they go back to the other top of the list, right? So a month later, all of a sudden, they're back. You get another extortion letter. Here's another attack. They wake you up. So you get these cycles. So we saw this kind of cycle through the different verticals 3 times since August. And now it's kind of like tapering down because it's either getting exhausted or they know that people are coming after them, right? So they keep on doing this until they, you know, there's money into it. They pivot quickly, right? And they pivot quickly in the sense of, oh, I tried to hit the port 80, but if port 80 is well defended, oh, wait a minute, this person never did anything for the authoritative DNS. It's 2 DNS servers behind 1 firewall. I'll poke the firewall, everything goes down. And they pivot, right? So they pivot horizontally across the infrastructure, looking for those critical dependencies. And they do some interesting scouting. They'll look for like, you know, critical dependencies in API structures. It hit APIs. Now, how many of you have thought about how do you protect your API structure from a DOS attack, right? That's some of the things that they, you know, so these aren't like dummies out there. So they do these rotations, these target rotations, right? And we know some organizations have paid because they wouldn't keep this up if nobody was paying. Even though the advice we give to everybody is don't pay, don't pay. Talk to law enforcement, don't pay. Even if law enforcement is totally clueless, you still talk to them and say, okay, here's who you need to talk to. And as a call out to everybody here, if you talk to your law enforcement and they need help in introductions, contact me, and then I can help that law enforcement organization plug in. When these DOS attacks happened, there were several law enforcement organizations that needed that sort of help, and so I would plug them into the right people at NCTFA, and then you have law enforcement to law enforcement talking to each other, and they go off. I'm not part of that. I'll plug them in, and then they go off, which is good. That's important to it, right? So because remember, through all this, it's not the packets are whacking you. It's the person who's launching the packets, right? The enemy isn't the packets. The enemy isn't a DDoS attack. The enemy is the person launching the DDoS attack. So what you're trying to defend against is that person. It's the extortionist. That's the one I'm trying to influence. That's the one I'm trying to say, go away. Just leave me alone. And by the way, I'm giving the evidence to law enforcement, and law enforcement is going to go after you, right? So when you look through these 7 principles, this is where you kind of look at the recommendations coming out of it. So you see out there in all the different recommendations, they're not naive recommendations we're given over and over as how to survive these DDoS extortion attacks. You see, report to law enforcement, deploy your essential tools. Right? I'll be surprised how many people don't have basic DNS defenses to protect your DNS, or they have never talked to the ISP on how to protect themselves, or they haven't done they don't know the simple stuff like ISPs wouldn't have the remote trigger black hole, or flow spec or things like that really configured and ready to go, right? So you'd have these, it's important to do that. And this last item on there is build your security trust community. In other words, you defend yourself against DOS attack. People cause DOS attacks, and people help you protect against the DOS attacks. It's all about the people. Groups like this, like what APNIC does, what Apricot does, are really, really critically important, because the reality of the decades I've been doing networking, it's always the people. Always the people. That DOS attack that happened back in '91, who did I call? I called somebody I talked to earlier about network security, Medica Kale, who's taught here in Apricot many, many, many times. And she taught me, oh, here's how we can actually do the ACLs and the basics of the network security I needed to know, because there was a lot of things I didn't know about network security, and she got me started. People, right? So was it a router to stop the DOS attack? No, it was like Medica helping me out when I was in a jam in '91. She was over at Cisco. She was one of my support people, right? She's a good friend, today, right? From that time period when she reached out. We later worked on a whole bunch of other things with it. So it's that people aspect of it, of the for it. So now preparing for DOS attacks, because they will come. Here are some good references out there. Some people, I was giving this presentation to a US group a couple of days last week. They said, hey, you don't have the US guidelines out there. I said, well, the US guidelines are good, but they're very confusing documents. The UK document is really good. Well, like A, B, C, D. It's very, because you don't want to get lost with you should do this, and it's all intertwined. And so some of the US NIST have some good guidelines, but they don't. The Australian one is really good. The NCS one is really good. These others out here, preparing for DOS attacks, that's something that was created by a whole bunch of post-mortem to DD4BC. So when DD4BC was arrested, right, and the DOS attack stopped, right? How do you stop a DOS attack? You arrest the person who's doing the DOS attack. That's how you stop a DOS attack. So DD4BC gets arrested, and then the crew that was behind that, we said, okay, let's take all the lessons learned. So preparing for DOS attacks, the essentials, that's the lessons learned. All right, so that's a collective. A whole bunch of us put together, and then published it over on Sankey for that. The 7 habits of highly effective cyber criminals, how to use it, the foundation there. And then the exploitable port filters. These are infrastructure ACLs, exploitable ports that you put to protect yourself. And these also help have in your network, they're a tool to have in parts of your network being used for DOS attacks, right? And that works like a champ. And when we had WannaCry and a couple of other these kind of wormable events out there, you know, in the networks who had explodable port filters, and these are just ACLs. This is a technique of putting ACLs on the edge of your network, and people say, oh, the routers can't handle the ACLs. Bull, the routers can handle it. And this is kind of like a technique, and give lots of examples from like Comcast and Charter and BT. So the networks that were doing it didn't have a problem. The networks that didn't do it, they had problems, right? So these sort of preparations work. So if you go through this exercise, my advice is to, you know, do these low cost approaches, right? You know, some people say, oh, let's go out there and get a DDoS vendor. Yes, as part of your resiliency architecture, you're probably going to need to be talking to different vendors and things like that and having key conversations. But you do those later, right? The first thing to do is go through all the things you can do within your network, within your context. Then you move over to like the step 2 where you have these security conversations. So what I did is I built some scripts for people, and you'll get this. Like sometimes you just kind of need to know, you know, let's call somebody in. What should I talk about? So the 7 critical security conversations is how you can pull different, like a vendor in or your ISP, and have what questions should I ask them? And so this is kind of like a script where you can go through and pull them in and then have a conversation. And again, how do you protect? One of the core tools for protecting DDoS attacks is the people connection. And the idea around these conversations is to be non-confrontational, just have a meaningful conversation so you understand what they can do and what you can do, and you work together on it, right? And it kind of is a scripted sort of tool that you can use with it. So you don't have to hire a security consultant to do this for you. Anybody here on this call can pull that down and pull in a vendor and start using it. And it's funny because I used it the first time. I wrote up the script when I was drafting this concept, and I gave it to my team over in Moratel in Indonesia, and they did it all, you know, in Bahasa. And they say, oh, you should do this, Pak Berry. I'm going like, no. You guys do it. I'm going to sit back here and watch you guys. And they did it, and they go like, oh, that was easy. That was great. You know, all buddy and everything, you know, out to lunch with the vendors that they pulled in with it. But they were all like informed. There was a way, here's the action plan we're going to do to make our network more resilient to attack, right? Which was the goal around this sort of idea with it. So we're in Q&A part. All my contacts are here. They're here for a reason, you know, because as I mentioned before, you know, when my first attack decades ago, I called somebody and she had bailed me out, you know. Irony to that story, tell a little story on that since we're at the end of it, we have time, is years later, she called me and woke me up here in California, and she's in Estonia, and says, Barry, we're getting whacked in Estonia. We need the help of everybody. And I go like, oh crap. And I rolled out of bed and went over, and we had a hot phone system at that time period. We called up a whole bunch of ISPs, and that was that famous Russian Estonia attack you read about in the papers. And the way that got escalated was Medica was in the knock with the head of the Estonian CERT team, because she's there, and she calls me up, and then I bridge my job was just a bridge. That's the only thing I did there, is I just bridged people together. But again, how did that DOS attack get taken care of? People talking to people. People talking to people. That's how it wasn't like any special tool or anything in the cloud or anything like that. It was people talking to people, and everybody started working together. And we used a variety of different tools in our toolkit to mitigate the attack. You know, number 1 was the phone call. Help, and you got help. So let's go ahead and open this up for questions. You know, drop your questions in the Q&A part. You know, love to hear what people think. And while we're waiting for people to drop some questions in here, where can we find the recording of this video for future viewing? I think Apricot publishes everything. Apricot is part of the operations community idea that all this is going to be published, so you'll be able to use this, all right, this video in the future. So it's being recorded. Stay tuned. You're signed up to it. You'll probably get the links and say, here's where we're publishing it on YouTube, or, you know, something like that. I know Apricot videos have been published on YouTube on that part. So, and which goes to another item around this is one way to stay tuned and plugged in is Apricot, as part of the different operations groups around the world, this is one of the best places to kind of get up-to-date information on what's going on in the networking world. So sign up to Nanog. Nanog's videos are published. RipeNCC's videos are published. If you want to hear it in Japan, JP Nog is published. So it's a very important area to tap into. I do that all the time. Okay, next. So let's see. One thing, I had a question that somebody asked me at the last conference. Sometimes DOS attack intelligence, it gets confusing because you'll go into the press, you'll read dark reading, you read different news articles, and you get people say like, oh, these DOS attacks are on the rise, or those DOS attacks are on the rise. And you're sitting there going like, wait a minute, I don't see these DOS attacks. They're not hitting my network, or they're not hitting my customers. The core reason behind that is, once a year, go out there and find every report from different vendors about DOS attacks. You want to get multiple, get at least, 8 to 10 of them, and you read through all of them. What you're reading is 8 to 10 different data sets of DOS attack, because what you have with DOS attack reports is you have a vendor or company reporting on the surface area of data collection. So to give an example of that, I'll just call it out. So you get, like, for instance, I was reading the other day a report from NetScout, right? NetScout/Arbor, and they're talking about game DOS attacks. So game DOS attacks is where in the gamers community, if you're in a competitive gamers community making money, there's these tools to give, micro DOS attacks, right? And the NetScout tools show them all the time because they pop up on the surface area collection of inside ISPs. Run a NetFlow and feed it into the NetScout's telemetry system. Akamai, where I'm working right now, doesn't see any of that. Why? Because our surface area of data collection is we have all these big, corporate media, edge distribution networks, utility companies, right? That's the surface area where protection, that's the data we're getting from. So then you'll look at an Akamai state of security and you'll get a different view of DOS attacks. Both are legitimate. Both are happening. So for instance, you're seeing some people report because they look at a lot of ransomware stuff, the ransomware crews, right, and we're starting to see it. We're later in the game, but we're starting to see it on Akamai side, but others were seeing it earlier because their surface area was looking at ransomware. The ransomware people are getting frustrated because people are not paying the ransom when I infect your network, because people are getting better. So what are they doing? They're saying, okay, if you're not going to pay me, I'll whack you with a DOS attack, because they saw the success of this latest extortion attack on crew, and they say, okay, I'm going to combine DOS with my ransom to get people to pay. I'm going to shake you up, threaten you with a baseball bat if you don't pay me to unlock your store, sort of thing. So that's a question I get asked quite often. So other questions? This is a good time to ask. Okay then. Well, I thank everybody again. You got the link in the chat for the where everything is at. Please go ahead and use when you need it. Reach out if you have questions on DDoS attacks. I'm always helpful to get on with people. I'm on the West Coast, so it makes it easier talking to people in morning times in Asia Pacific, like I'm doing right now today. And thank you everybody for coming, and hopefully you'll watch some of the other sessions running in parallel. This session, I'm doing a couple more sessions, and Philip's doing some more sessions too. So thank you everybody, and I'm glad you came to Apricot.
We'll see Barry back in the next session at quarter past. We'll have a bit of a break now. Got a good attendance here, which is really good. So I'd like to see you all back at quarter past to listen to what else Barry has got to impart. See you
Hey,
soon.
John, is it the same Zoom session?
I'm not sure. I'm assuming so, but one of the previous comments, oh, here we go. It's not. So we
Okay.
need to sign off and come back into it. Thanks, Arth. That's appreciated.
Okay, fantastic. So now we know. So I guess we go to the website and we plug in, we connect to that Zoom session. And that one's
Exactly.
also talking about more of the miscreant stuff, about miscreants attacking DNS.
Excellent. That'll be good. All right.
Yeah.
See you all soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.